The sun of the frontier world dipped low, painting the open plains in soft red and gold. Thomas stood by the wooden fence, watching the cattle-like beasts move slowly across the grass. His hands were rough, his back bent with years of work, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of a man who had seen much. He had been a rancher most of his life. Now, in his later years, the wide land felt more empty than ever. The ranch stretched for miles, quiet and still except for the soft calls of the animals and the hum of old machines. Once, this place had been full of laughter and voices. He remembered the days when neighbors would ride in for supper, when his children played near the barn, when his wife would call him inside as night came. Those days were gone now. The neighbors had moved away, his family had drifted across the stars, and his wife had passed long ago. Only Thomas and the land remained. He fixed fences, repaired tools, and kept the beasts fed. That was his life now. Some mornings he woke before dawn and asked himself why he still kept going. But he did. He told himself it was because the ranch needed him, though deep down he knew it was because he had nothing else. The galaxy had moved on without him. Thomas's world was simple but heavy with silence. He talked to the animals sometimes, just to hear a voice. He would sit on the porch in the evening with a cup of warm drink, listening to the wind carry dust across the plains. In those quiet hours, he often thought his life was already finished. He was just waiting, living out his last days under the wide sky. That evening, as the sky turned dark, Thomas saw something strange. A streak of light cut across the heavens, brighter than any falling star. It did not vanish like the others but grew larger, breaking into smaller lights as it came closer. Thomas set his cup down and narrowed his eyes. He had lived long enough to know the difference between a meteor and a ship. The light slowed, hovering just above the hills beyond his ranch. The ground shook lightly, and the cattle stirred in alarm. Thomas felt his heart beat faster. It had been many years since he had seen a ship land anywhere near his land. Visitors rarely came to this forgotten world. The last time he had seen outsiders, it had brought nothing but trouble. Still, curiosity drew him forward. He stepped into the barn, picked up an old lantern, and walked toward the fields. The lights were now clear, steady, and deliberate. A vessel, small but sturdy, descended into his pasture. Dust swirled up, and the cattle scattered. Thomas raised his hand to shield his eyes as the ship touched the ground with a hiss of steam. For a long moment, nothing happened. The vessel sat silent, silver against the dark grass. Thomas thought about turning back. He was old, alone, and in no mood for visitors who might bring trouble. But something kept him there. Maybe it was the quiet pull of wonder, the same feeling he had as a boy when he first saw ships travel through the sky. Then the hatch opened. A ramp lowered with a soft hum, and figures began to appear. Thomas held his breath. At first, he thought they were ordinary humans, but as the figures came closer, he saw the truth. Their shapes were tall and graceful, their movements fluid in a way that no human carried. Their skin carried faint markings that caught the lantern light, not glowing but patterned like stone worn smooth by rivers. 11 of them stepped onto the grass, each dressed in travel garments that seemed both simple and strange. They spoke softly to one another in a language Thomas did not know, the tones rising and falling like music. Then one of them looked at him directly. She spoke in broken human words, her voice careful but steady. "You are Thomas," she said. He froze. His name carried across the open field as if they had known him for years. "I am," he answered slowly. "Who are you, and what brings you to my land?" The woman bowed her head slightly. We are widows. We have lost our homes. We have lost our bondmates. We have come because we need you. You are to be our husband." Thomas stared at her as if he had misheard. Husband. The word felt heavy, strange, and impossible. He almost laughed but stopped when he saw the seriousness in her eyes. The others stood behind her, watching him with quiet hope. He shook his head. "You must have made a mistake. I am an old man. I have nothing to give you but a broken fence and tired hands." The woman stepped closer, her voice soft yet firm. "Not mistake. We searched records. We searched for safety. Your land is safe. You are strong. You can be our guardian. You can be our husband." Thomas opened his mouth but found no words. The 11 strangers stood in the night, waiting for him. The lantern flame flickered, the cattle shifted in the distance, and the wide sky above seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in many years, Thomas felt his life shift. He did not know if it was danger or blessing, but he knew one thing: his quiet, lonely days were no longer the same. Thomas stood still, the lantern light trembling in his hand. The 11 alien widows were no longer shadows in the field. They were close enough now for him to see their faces. Each one looked different, yet they all shared the same quiet strength. Their eyes carried sorrow, but also determination. The leader, the one who had spoken to him, stepped closer. Her voice was calm, though her words were slow, shaped carefully as if she had learned the human tongue not long ago. "We have no home," she said. "Our bondmates fell in war. Our world is gone. We were told you would give us shelter." Thomas frowned. "Told by who?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "I live alone out here. I never called for anyone." The widow nodded as if expecting his doubt. "Records. Old signals. Your land is safe. We searched far. We came here." The others murmured behind her. Some looked around the field with cautious eyes, as if danger might follow them even here. Others watched Thomas, waiting for his answer. He felt a weight pressing on him. He was just an old rancher. What could he offer 11 strangers who carried such loss on their shoulders? "You call me husband," he said at last, his voice low. "Why me?" The woman's gaze did not waver. "Our way is to bind to a guardian. Without bond, widows are taken, hunted, broken. We cannot survive without protection. You are human, but you are strong. You live far from war. You can be our guardian. You can be our husband." Thomas shook his head slowly. "I'm no protector. Look at me. I can barely keep this ranch standing. I'm no hero, and I'm no answer to whatever you've lost." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the night air. Then one of the widows behind her spoke in a softer tone. Though her accent was thick, the meaning was clear. "We do not ask for riches. We do not ask for glory. Only shelter. Only a place where we can breathe without fear." The simple truth in her words stirred something in him. He remembered the feeling of loss, the long nights after his wife had passed, the emptiness that never left. These women had lost not one, but 11 lives worth of love. And still, they stood strong, searching for hope. Thomas sighed. He rubbed his tired face with a calloused hand. "The barn is empty. If you need rest, you can stay there tonight. But I make no promises beyond that." Relief swept across their faces. The leader gave a small bow, her voice carrying gratitude. "Thank you, Thomas. We will not forget this kindness." They moved with quiet order, carrying packs and small crates from their ship. Each widow stepped carefully, respecting the land as if it already belonged to them. Thomas led them to the barn, lighting the way with his lantern. Inside, the air smelled of hay and wood. The widows spread blankets on the ground, working together with silent understanding. Thomas watched from the doorway, feeling the strangeness of it all. 11 strangers, speaking of war and loss, now resting under his roof. He lingered outside, his eyes drifting back to the ship resting in the pasture. It looked worn, patched in places, its engines tired. Clearly, it had traveled far and with difficulty. He wondered what kind of journey had brought them here, to his forgotten ranch on a quiet world. As the night deepened, Thomas sat on the porch with his lantern beside him. The widows' voices drifted from the barn, low and musical. He could not understand their language, but he could hear comfort in the tones, like family trying to remind one another they were not alone. Thomas thought of the word they had used, husband. To them, it meant safety, guidance, a bond that kept predators away. To him, it was something different, something sacred and lost long ago. He could not imagine himself filling that role again. Yet a part of him wondered what it would mean if he tried. The next morning came with clear skies. Thomas woke to the sound of movement in the yard. When he stepped outside, he found the widows already working. 2 of them carried buckets of water from the well. Another group cleared fallen branches near the fence. One was even studying the cattle, observing them with sharp eyes as if she wanted to learn how to care for them. Thomas stood with his arms crossed, watching. They moved with quiet discipline, each knowing her task without being told. There was no complaint, no wasted motion. They were not here to be a burden. They were here to build. He walked over to the well, where the leader was lifting a heavy bucket. "You don't have to do this," he said. "This is hard work." She smiled faintly. "We do not rest while you work. If we are to stay, we must share the weight." Her answer left him silent. He had expected helplessness, but what he saw was strength. These were not fragile wanderers. They had survived loss, crossed the stars, and still stood tall. Later that day, Thomas invited them to the table in his small house. The widows sat close together, their tall frames filling the room. He cooked a simple meal of bread and stew, and though they were unused to the taste, they ate with quiet thanks. Afterward, they told him more of their story. Their world had been attacked by raiders. Their bondmates, the men of their colony, had died in the defense. Their culture did not leave widows unguarded, for in the wider galaxy, many saw unprotected women as easy prey. So they had fled, carrying the memory of their people with them. Thomas listened, his rough hands resting on the table. He felt the weight of their words, the kind of pain that never truly heals. He had thought himself alone in his grief, but now he saw 11 lives scarred by loss, yet still holding on to hope. When the sun set again, Thomas stepped outside with them. The ranch lay quiet, the cattle grazing under the dimming light. The widows stood beside him, their eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for something unseen. He realized then that his choice mattered more than he wanted to admit. He could send them away, keep his life unchanged, and return to his lonely routine. Or he could let them stay, and accept that his days of silence were gone. Thomas was not ready to decide. But as he watched the widows laugh softly among themselves, sharing small pieces of comfort, he felt a spark inside him. For the first time in years, his ranch no longer seemed empty. The ranch was no longer quiet the way it once had been. For many years, Thomas had known only the sound of wind across the plains and the low calls of the cattle. Now, there were new voices, soft and musical, echoing from the barn and the yard. The 11 widows moved through his land as if they had always belonged there, and Thomas found himself caught between disbelief and wonder. Every morning, he woke to find them already working. Some gathered water from the well. Others carried hay to the animals or studied the machines that Thomas used to keep the ranch running. Their hands were not idle. They mended broken tools with strange skill, weaving alien knowledge into simple human equipment. Thomas watched them closely, unsure what to make of their presence. He had agreed to let them stay for one night, yet they had not left. Instead, they acted as though the ranch was now their home. And though Thomas told himself he should send them away, he found no words when he stood in front of them. At breakfast, the widows sat quietly around his long wooden table. The leader, the woman who had first spoken to him, bowed her head before speaking. "Thomas," she said carefully, "we thank you. You gave us safety when the stars gave us none. We wish to remain here." Thomas stirred his drink slowly. "Remain? This is no place for a group like you. It is a broken ranch. I am an old man. There is nothing here for you." The widow's eyes held steady. "There is land. There is water. There is a sky without warships. That is more than what we had. We do not need riches. We need peace. You can give us that." Thomas frowned. "And this word you use? Husband. Why keep calling me that?" The widow glanced at the others before answering. "It is our way. When bondmates die, widows must join to a new guardian. It is our shield. In our law, the word is husband. You may hear it as burden, but to us it means life." The room was quiet after that. Thomas felt the weight of their eyes. He rubbed his rough hands together, searching for words. "I am not the man you think I am. I cannot protect anyone. I can hardly protect myself." One of the widows leaned forward. Her face was softer, her voice quiet but strong. "Yet you live here, alone, unbroken. That is strength. You kept this land alive. You kept yourself alive. That is protection." Thomas shook his head, though inside he felt something stir. He had thought of himself as weak, worn, and forgotten. Yet these strangers looked at him as if he were still someone worth following. The days that followed only deepened his confusion. The widows did not rest in idleness. They worked beside him in everything. They fixed a broken pump near the well using tools Thomas had never seen. They cleared weeds that had spread across the fields. They even repaired the old windmill, making it turn smooth for the first time in years. Thomas found himself with less work than before, yet more company than he had ever expected. In the evenings, the widows would sit near the fire in the barn, singing songs in their own tongue. The melodies carried across the ranch, gentle and full of longing. Thomas often sat on his porch, listening in silence. The songs touched something deep in him, reminding him of nights long ago when his wife had sung to their children. Still, the word husband followed him. Each time the widows spoke to him, they used it with respect, as though it were already decided. The sound of it made Thomas uneasy. He wondered if they truly saw him as a man or only as a shield against the dangers of the galaxy. One afternoon, Thomas walked the boundary of his ranch with the leader by his side. She studied the land with careful eyes, noting the fences and the distant hills. "You keep this place alive," she said. "It is strong land. It will protect us." Thomas shook his head. Land does not protect. Land only waits. I am no different. I am just waiting here, passing time. The leader stopped and turned toward him. Her expression was calm but serious. You think you wait for the end. But the end has not come. We came to you because we saw a man who still stands. That is not waiting. That is living. Her words stayed with him long after they returned to the house. That night, as he sat alone, Thomas stared at the stars. He wondered why fate had brought these women to his land, why they believed in him when he did not believe in himself. But not all was peaceful. As the widows worked and settled, rumors began to spread. The nearest settlement was many miles away, yet news traveled faster than he liked. Traders who passed by his ranch noticed the strangers. Their curious eyes lingered too long, and Thomas felt a prickle of unease. One evening, as the widows prepared food in the barn, Thomas sat with the leader once again. His voice was low, carrying the weight of his thoughts. If word spreads that you are here, trouble will follow. This land is quiet, but not blind. Outsiders may come, and not all will mean well. The widow nodded. We know. We lived through war. We know danger follows us. That is why we chose you. You are far, and you are strong. Thomas sighed. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was not strong, that he could not fight off the kind of trouble that might come. But as he looked at the 11 faces gathered in the barn, he felt the old fire inside him flicker. Maybe he was not as broken as he thought. The widows laughed softly together as they shared their meal, their voices blending like music. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive. Thomas sat in silence, torn between fear and hope. He did not yet call them family. He did not yet accept the name they gave him. But deep inside, he knew the truth. His life, which he had thought finished, was changing with every passing day. And though confusion still clouded his mind, Thomas felt a quiet strength returning to his heart. The mornings on the ranch were never the same after the widows arrived. Before the sun even rose, Thomas would hear movement in the yard. Buckets clinked at the well, wood cracked as it was chopped for the fire, and soft voices filled the air with a rhythm that sounded almost like music. The once silent ranch had become a place of steady life. At first, Thomas did not know what to do with them. He had spent so many years alone that he was not used to anyone helping him. He would rise with the sun ready to carry water or feed the cattle, only to find the work already half done. The widows worked with discipline and care. They seemed to carry an understanding of each other that required few words. Where one stopped, another began. Still, Thomas tried to keep to his old ways. He fixed tools, repaired fences, and mended the roof when storms passed over. Yet he noticed something. Every time he picked up a task, 1 or 2 widows appeared to help him. If he lifted a heavy beam, hands reached out to steady it. If he worked the stubborn pump, someone knelt beside him with strange tools that made the job easier. One afternoon, Thomas sat on the porch sharpening a blade used for cutting brush. The leader of the widows walked toward him, carrying a bundle of cloth. She placed it on the table beside him and opened it to reveal a set of tools unlike any he had ever seen. "These will help," she said simply. Thomas lifted one, turning it in his rough hands. The tool glowed faintly with small etchings but did not feel strange. It was balanced and firm, made with care. He raised an eyebrow. "You trust me with this?" The widow nodded. "We trust you. You gave us shelter. We give what we can." Thomas said nothing, but inside he felt a warmth he had not known for years. It had been a long time since anyone had given him something out of trust rather than trade. Over the days, the bond between Thomas and the widows grew in small, steady steps. When he taught them how to care for the cattle, they listened with focus, repeating his instructions until they understood. When they cooked their meals, they offered him food flavored with spices from their world. At first the taste was strange, but soon Thomas found himself enjoying it, even looking forward to it. At night, he would sit on the porch, and the widows would gather in the yard. They often sang songs in their language. The music was soft but filled with emotion, like stories carried through sound. Thomas could not understand the words, yet he felt their meaning. Loss, hope, and unity wove through the melodies. He sometimes closed his eyes and let the music take him back to memories of his own family, the nights when laughter and song had filled the air. Though he still felt uneasy when they called him husband, Thomas began to understand what they meant by it. To them, the word was not about romance but about protection, guidance, and unity. They were not asking him to replace the lives they had lost. They were asking him to stand with them so that together they would not be broken. One morning, trouble came in a small but sharp form. The youngest widow, though still grown, had wandered too close to the edge of the property. She was studying the wild plants near the fence when a predator beast leapt from the grass. It was small but fast, its teeth sharp enough to wound badly. Thomas was nearby when he heard her cry. Without thinking, he grabbed his old rifle from the porch and ran toward the sound. His legs, though slower than they once had been, carried him with surprising strength. He raised the rifle and fired, sending the beast running back into the tall grass. The widow sat on the ground, shaken but unharmed. Thomas helped her to her feet, steadying her with a firm grip. Her eyes were wide with fear, but also with respect. She whispered, "Guardian." The word struck Thomas more than he expected. That evening, the widows sat close around him, speaking softly among themselves. The leader finally said. The ranch had settled into a new rhythm. Days began with work and ended with quiet meals, songs, and laughter. For Thomas, it felt almost like a second life. He no longer woke to silence but to voices, footsteps, and the sight of 11 widows moving with purpose. The land was alive again. Yet in the back of his mind, unease grew. He had lived long enough to know peace never lasted on the frontier. Word traveled faster than the wind. Traders passed by, eyes lingering on the strangers who worked the land. Curiosity turned into whispers, and whispers often drew danger. One afternoon, Thomas rode into the nearest settlement to trade supplies. It was a small place, just a cluster of dusty buildings around a main road. He moved carefully, as he always did, but this time he noticed more eyes on him than usual. At the general store, the shopkeeper leaned over the counter and spoke in a low voice. "Heard you've got company out there on your ranch, Thomas. Not just travelers. Strange women. Tall ones. Is it true?" Thomas kept his face calm. "I've got workers helping me on the land. That's all." The shopkeeper narrowed his eyes. "That's not what I heard. Folks say they ain't human. Folks say they're widows from some broken colony. If that's true, you might have drawn the wrong kind of attention." Thomas said nothing more. He took his supplies, mounted his old transport, and rode back to the ranch with a heavy heart. The widows had brought life back to his land, but they had also brought risk. He could already feel the weight of it pressing down on him. That night, as the widows gathered in the barn, Thomas sat on the porch and watched the horizon. The stars shone bright, but his eyes searched the dark hills. Somewhere out there, he knew men were talking. Men who cared more about profit than peace. His fears proved true only days later. A group of riders appeared on the edge of the ranch. Dust rose behind their machines as they moved across the plain, slow but steady. Thomas counted 6 of them. They wore rough clothes, patched with armor, and their weapons were visible even from a distance. The widows saw them too. They gathered near the barn, their faces calm but alert. The leader stepped beside Thomas, her voice quiet. "Trouble comes." Thomas nodded. "Stay back. Let me speak first." The riders stopped a short distance from the porch. Their leader, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. His voice carried across the yard. "Evening, old man. We been hearing strange stories about your land. Say you've got some outsiders living with you." Thomas stood straight, though his back ached. "This is my land. Who lives here is my concern." The man grinned, showing broken teeth. "That's where you're wrong. You've got something valuable, and out here, valuable things don't stay hidden for long. Those women belong to us now. Hand them over, and maybe we'll leave your ranch standing." The widows behind Thomas did not move, but he felt their eyes on him. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between both sides. Thomas could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Years ago, he would have faced men like this with fire in his blood. Now he was older, slower. But as he looked at the faces of the widows, he felt something awaken inside him. His voice was firm. "You will not take them. They are under my protection." The scarred man laughed, shaking his head. "You think an old rancher can stop us?" He motioned to his men. "We'll be back, Thomas. And when we come, we'll bring more. Think hard before you stand in our way." With that, the riders turned and sped off into the distance, leaving only dust in their wake. Thomas let out a slow breath, his hands trembling slightly. The widows came to stand beside him. The leader placed her hand on his shoulder. "You chose to stand. That is husband." Thomas looked at her, the weight of his decision heavy on him. "They will return. Next time, they will come ready to fight." The widow's eyes were steady. "Then we fight with you." Over the next days, the ranch changed. The widows worked with Thomas to strengthen the land. They used their strange tools to reinforce the fences, turning them into barriers stronger than wood alone. They built traps near the edges of the fields, hidden but sharp. They repaired Thomas's old rifle and even showed him how to use the alien energy weapons they carried. Thomas trained beside them, his old body aching but his spirit burning with new fire. The widows moved with skill, teaching him formations and signals from their world. Though their weapons were few, their discipline was strong. At night, Thomas lay awake, listening to the wind. He thought about the years he had spent in silence, waiting for his life to end. Now he had something worth standing for again. He knew the raiders would return, but he also knew he was no longer alone. One evening, as the sun set, Thomas stood with the widows at the edge of the ranch. The land stretched wide and golden before them, peaceful for now. The leader looked at him and said, "This place is home. We will not let it be taken. Together, we are stronger than alone." Thomas nodded. His rough hands tightened around the rifle. "Then together we'll make them regret ever setting eyes on this ranch." The widows smiled faintly, their faces lit by the last light of day. For the first time in many years, Thomas felt not just like a survivor but like a man with purpose. The ranch was no longer just his land. It was theirs. and he was ready to defend it. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Thomas had never seen his ranch so alive with work and purpose. The widows moved with quiet discipline, turning every corner of the land into something stronger. The fences became barriers reinforced with alien metal. The barn doors were braced with hidden locks. Small traps were laid along the paths leading to the ranch. Thomas worked beside them, his hands rough and his back sore, but his spirit steady. The widows taught him how to use their strange energy rifles. At first, he fumbled with the unfamiliar weight, but with practice, he grew confident. His old human rifle still leaned against the porch, but now he carried more than one weapon. Each evening, they gathered together in the barn. The widows spoke of their fallen bondmates, of battles lost, and of the will to survive. Thomas listened, his heart heavy but also proud. These women had endured loss beyond anything he had known, yet they still stood strong. Now, they stood with him. The attack came at dawn. Thomas was on the porch when he heard the distant hum of engines. Dust rose on the horizon as a larger group of raiders rode fast toward the ranch. He counted at least 20 machines, their riders armed and ready. He called out, and the widows moved quickly to their places. Some took positions along the fence, their rifles steady. Others waited near the barn, ready to strike if the raiders broke through. Thomas stood at the center, his rifle in hand, his jaw set. The raiders approached with shouts and laughter, certain of their victory. Their leader, the scarred man, rode at the front. He pointed toward the ranch and called out, "Old man, this is your last chance. Hand them over, or we burn this place to the ground." Thomas raised his rifle and aimed. His voice was calm but carried across the land. "This ranch is ours. If you want it, you'll have to fight for it." The raiders roared and surged forward. Engines howled, wheels cut into the dirt, and the attack began. The widows fired first. Bright beams of energy cut through the air, striking the raiders with precision. Machines spun out of control, crashing into the grass. Some riders fell hard, scrambling for cover. The traps Thomas and the widows had set worked as planned. Spikes shot up from hidden pits, throwing machines into the air. Explosives made from alien tools sent dust and fire across the plain. Thomas fired his rifle, each shot aimed true. His hands shook at first, but the memory of younger years returned to him. He was no stranger to danger. The fire in his chest burned bright. The raiders pressed harder, shouting as they tried to break through. Some reached the fences, but the widows were ready. They fought side by side, moving with skill and unity. When one widow fired, another covered her. When one was pressed, another stepped forward to shield her. The scarred man rode through the chaos, his voice loud. "Take the women. Kill the old man." Hearing that, Thomas felt a surge of strength. He stood tall, firing again and again. The widows rallied around him, their voices rising as they shouted signals in their language. Together, they pushed back. The fight raged across the ranch. Dust and smoke filled the air, the ground shook with the clash of machines, and the sky echoed with the sound of battle. But slowly, the raiders began to falter. They had come expecting an easy victory, not a fortress defended by unity and courage. Thomas saw the scarred man charging toward the barn. Without hesitation, he stepped forward to meet him. The two faced each other in the yard, weapons ready. "You should have stayed quiet, old man," the raider growled. Thomas's voice was steady. "And you should have left my land." The man raised his weapon, but before he could fire, two widows stepped from the side, their rifles blazing. The raider's machine exploded in flame, throwing him to the ground. He scrambled to rise, but Thomas aimed his rifle and fired. The shot struck true, sending the man tumbling into the dust. When their leader fell, the raiders broke. Some fled at once, engines roaring as they disappeared into the hills. Others tried to fight on but were quickly overwhelmed by the widow's skill. Within minutes, the ranch was silent again, the attackers gone. Thomas stood in the yard, his chest heaving, his hands tight on the rifle. Around him, the widows gathered, their faces calm but proud. The leader stepped forward, placing her hand on his arm. "You stood," she said softly. "You fought with us. This is what it means to be husband. You are guardian." Thomas looked at the women around him. Their eyes shone with strength and trust. He felt his chest swell with something he had not known for years. Pride. Purpose. Family. The ranch was scarred from the fight. Fences broken, ground torn, smoke still drifting in the air. But it still stood. They all still stood. That night, as the widows sang their songs once more, Thomas sat among them. He was tired, sore, and older than all of them, yet he felt alive in a way he had not thought possible. For the first time in many years, he was not waiting for life to end. He was living it again. The raiders would not forget their defeat. Trouble might return one day. But Thomas knew he would no longer face it alone. He had 11 by his side, and together they had proved that even the strongest threats could be turned away. The ranch was not just his anymore. It was theirs. And he was ready to protect it for as long as he drew breath. The morning after the battle, the ranch was quiet again. The smoke from broken machines drifted away on the breeze, and the land smelled of dust and ash. The widows walked through the yard, clearing wreckage and gathering what could still be used. Their movements were steady, their faces calm, but behind their silence lay pride. Thomas stood on the porch, his rifle resting against the wall. His body ached from the fight, his hands sore from gripping weapons, but his spirit was alive. He had not felt this way in years. He watched the widows move across the ranch and realized something had changed deep inside him. He was no longer alone. The leader came to stand beside him. She looked out across the land, her eyes following the line of the broken fence. "We won," she said softly. Thomas nodded. "We won because we stood together. If I had been alone, I would not have lasted a minute." The leader turned toward him, her face calm but firm. "That is what family means. Alone we break. Together we endure." Her words sank into him like roots into soil. Family. It was a word Thomas had not spoken in years. His own had been gone so long that he had stopped thinking of himself as part of anything. But now, as he looked at the 11 faces that had chosen him, he understood. The ranch was not just his anymore. It was theirs. Over the days that followed, life settled again, though it was not the same as before. The widows and Thomas worked together to repair the damage from the fight. Broken fences were rebuilt stronger than before. The barn doors were patched and reinforced. The yard was cleared of wreckage, and even the ruined machines of the raiders were stripped for parts that could serve a new purpose. The widows sang as they worked. Their voices carried across the land, a mix of grief for the past and hope for the future. Thomas often stopped to listen, his heart filled with a peace he thought he would never know again. As the ranch healed, so did Thomas. He no longer woke with the weight of emptiness pressing on him. Instead, he woke to voices, laughter, and purpose. Each day began with tasks shared among them all, and each evening ended with food and song. The silence that had once haunted him was gone. One evening, as the sun painted the fields in gold, Thomas sat on the porch while the widows gathered around. The youngest widow, the one he had saved from the predator beast, sat at his feet and looked up at him with wide eyes. "Thomas," she said softly, "do you still think life is over?" Thomas chuckled, his voice low and warm. "No. Life has just begun again." The widows smiled, their faces lit by the fading light. The leader spoke then, her voice steady. "When we first came, we called you husband. You did not accept. But now, you have stood with us, fought with us, lived with us. You are husband in truth, not in name only. You are guardian, and we are yours as much as you are ours." Thomas looked at them, his rough hands resting on his knees. He thought of the years behind him, the silence, the waiting. Then he thought of the days ahead, filled with purpose, struggle, and companionship. His heart swelled with quiet strength. "You gave me back what I thought was gone," he said. "I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I will face it with you. If husband is the word for that, then I accept it." The widows bowed their heads in respect, their eyes shining. The youngest laughed with joy, and the sound carried across the yard like music. That night, the widows sang louder than ever before. Their songs rose into the stars, filling the sky with a sound that felt like both memory and promise. Thomas sat among them, his face lit by the fire, and for the first time in many years, he felt truly whole. In the days that followed, the ranch grew stronger. The widows planted new crops using seeds they had carried from their world. Their knowledge of growth was unlike Thomas's, and soon the fields showed signs of life he had never seen before. Strange flowers bloomed beside the cattle fields, their colors bright against the plain. The wind carried their scent across the land, mixing with the familiar smell of earth and grass. Travelers who passed by spoke in hushed tones of the ranch that had stood against raiders. Some came closer, hoping to see the strange women who lived there. But none dared to challenge them again. The memory of the fight spread quickly, and Thomas's land became known as a place not to be touched. Yet for Thomas and the widows, it was not about fear or reputation. It was about survival, unity, and the chance to live without running. The ranch was more than land now. It was a haven. One morning, as Thomas walked the fields with the leader, she looked out across the hills and said, "We lost much, but we have found new life here. You gave us that chance. We will never forget." Thomas shook his head. "You gave it to me as much as I gave it to you. Alone, I was fading. Together, we are strong." She smiled, her eyes soft. "Then this is the bond. This is family." Thomas looked across the land. The sun was rising, casting light over the ranch. The widows were already working in the fields, their voices drifting through the morning air. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt not like an old man waiting for the end, but like a man standing at the beginning of something greater. The fight had shown him that his life was not finished. The widows had shown him that family could be found again, even in the most unexpected places. And the land, once silent and empty, now carried the sound of life, laughter, and song. The old human rancher who thought life was over had found a new purpose. He was not just Thomas anymore. He was guardian. He was husband. He was part of something larger than himself. And together with the 11 who had chosen him, he faced the future with strength, hope, and the certainty that their bond would endure whatever came.